You're listening to the Media People Podcast, the show where we learn about the people who make up the media industry to find out where they started, where they are now, and the stories in between. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. Today we're very proud to have Sonia Carreno, the president of the Interactive Advertising Bureau of Canada, join us. A veteran of the digital media industry, in part one of our chat, Sonia discusses life growing up in Northern Ontario and Europe, her time at International Management Group, and what it's like being part of the digital media industry leading up to the dot-com bubble of 2000. Come back next week for part two of our interview, where we'll discuss Sonia's time with the DAC Group and how the opportunity with the IAB Canada came about. We'll also get a peek into some of the things Sonia is looking to accomplish during her tenure as president. Sonia, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for showing the interest.
Let's go right back to the beginning. Where were you from?
I was actually from Wawa, Ontario. Some people know it as the Big Goose in Ontario, in the north, and that's on Lake Superior.
I had to Google that. It's a pretty small town, only about 2,900 people according to Wikipedia.
And even less in the 70s.
And it's kind of like the halfway point. I guess if you were going to Thunder Bay and you cut through Sault Ste. Marie, you'd have to go through Wawa to get there.
That's right. It's very important.
Tell us what life was like growing up in Wawa, Ontario, I guess in the 70s.
Well, I guess, it wouldn't be fair to say that I spent a lot of time there. So I spent my toddler years there, and then our family moved to Europe for a couple of years while I was fairly young. And then from Europe, we just actually moved straight to Toronto.
Where in Europe were you from? Or where were you living, I should say?
So my dad is Spanish and my mom was German, and so both of them when they came to Canada, they basically never really unpacked their bags. They were always antsy and always wanting to go back home to meet with their relatives and basically spend time at home, and I was part of that reality. So I was basically a piece of the luggage that they would take back and forth, my siblings and I.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time there.
So is it safe to say you're also fluent in both German and Spanish?
That's right.
Oh, that's a great thing to have. Where did you prefer living? You don't have to answer this, Spain or Germany. I've been to both places, and they're both very charming in their own respects. And for different reasons.
I love both. So I really, really love both countries. I feel more at home in Germany. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that it was my mother tongue. But I also love Spain. So in terms of, when I see myself vacationing and spending extended periods of time in Europe, I can see myself on the coast of Spain, and I love the country for that. But in Germany, I like being there because it just feels like everything works.
And what kind of perspective of the world did this give you at such a young age?
Well, I think at a young age I learned that definitely that there's just different perspectives that need to be respected, and I think that it also probably taught me a lot of tolerance that would probably be subconscious learnings just, on cultural sensitivity and the fact that things are done differently in different countries and by different cultures. I think that it taught me, the obvious, the languages, and, to learn the value also of growing up with cultural, the arts and literature in those respective countries can add a whole tapestry of difference, I guess, or individuality to a person. So I think that, it's just, I feel very fortunate.
So speaking a little bit of literature, you've mentioned that you'd say two of your influences outside of your mother, who you cite as being very heavy in influencing you growing up and being a role model for you. You also cite Margaret Lawrence and Agatha Christie. Yeah. What attracted you to those two authors?
Well, I think those two, first of all, Agatha Christie is just such a genius in my mind, to have the ability to deconstruct a crime and add such a drama and such a personality to a story, I think is incredible. The science behind crime and then mixing that with character and psychology, I think is fascinating. So I think Agatha Christie was just one of my heroes when it came to just downright smarts and intellect. And then when I started to read Margaret Laurence when I was in my high school years, and Margaret Laurence to me was just also capturing very subtle parts of life and in very interesting ways. And I think that I was really connected to, certainly her work as the masterpiece of the diviners, but the Stone Angel really appealed to me. And this idea of seeing the world and life from the perspective of somebody in a certain phase of their lives. And in this case, the Stone Angel was a woman in her 80s. I just made a real connection with it, and I really came to appreciate just seniors around us every day. It was important.
So you'd say you're a sucker for a great narrative.
I'm a sucker for a great narrative. I'm a sucker for really great characters, and I think I love human behavior, and so people who can delve so deeply into the psyche and write eloquently as well, I think that's the appeal to me.
That is a difficult thing to do, and it's no surprise you've mentioned that English was your forte in high school. That's what you really settled on, that and literature. But you did find your way towards media through a senior class. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you kind of got that bug?
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, I am a sucker for literature, and I was drawn to taking as many English and literature courses as I could, and I stumbled upon a class that was all about media. And at the time, media at that age really has had multiple meanings to it. So, the media as in, outdoor and signage and all those things, but then also propaganda and the art of persuasion. And to me, learning about those skills and learning that this is going on a day-to-day basis. We're exposed to this kind of thing.
Do you mean like the Marshall McLuhan type theories,
yeah,
like
totally.
hot and cold media, things like that?
Totally, yeah, that and George Orwell. I mean, we went into a lot of different, the different kinds of media and different kinds of, mediums, and so for me, I found that very, very interesting, and I really became inspired to follow through with that and pay attention to it. And so I started to deconstruct every commercial that I saw, and every time I saw an ad, I kind of slowed it down a little bit and thought about who crafted that and who and why and what would the brief, and now having been in the industry for quite a while, I kind of thought more about, what's the brief behind that ad and who got into my head like that type of thing.
And after you left high school and you had the media bug, you first went to Georgian College, was it in Barrie?
Yeah.
And what did you study there?
So I started in tourism, thinking that tourism was going to be my thing, and then I pretty quickly realized that was just not going to be my thing. And the idea of sending people on vacations and making sure that they were having a good time was just not. It wasn't for me. And so then I switched to marketing courses, because when I was doing tourism studies originally, what I really liked was the business of it, the organization of finances and of marketing and all the different aspects of running a business, which has always been appealing to me, even as a kid, playing store. So I just naturally gravitated towards the marketing program, and that's where I settled in marketing, and then started to get involved with the advertising program. And really, when I was in advertising, I felt like I finally found my home.
And that was at both Georgian and Humber? Because I'm pretty sure there was creative writing in there too, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. And creative writing was more at Humber, and that was all about, crafting the art of persuasion, creative writing, creative storytelling, building characters, so getting into the very specific skills of writing, which I really enjoyed.
It's crazy to think that those two programs, or at least facets of them, weren't hand in hand within each other, at least creative writing within Humber, because with content marketing being the buzzword of the last year or so, you'd really want to see good creative writers within that program, or at least coming out with what it was we've been discussing. But after you wrapped up college, what would you say was your first media gig?
So interesting question. My first media gig, I'll just go back to what my first gig was in the marketing industry, and that was sports marketing. So I was at IMG International Management Group, and
Oh, they're a behemoth. They do everything.
they really do. And the job that I sort of landed was about a little bit about event coordination, but not really much. I was and I was fairly young and wild and free at the time. So I would help with events, but what really was fascinating to me was the broadcast side. And so I worked alongside, some of the smartest people in broadcasting at the time. The specialty channels were coming about in Canada.
So it's like basically premium cable was you have 35 channels possibly. You get TSN and Much Music and maybe something else.
Right. And so suddenly there was going to be a whole onslaught of, the outdoor channels, and all sorts of specialty cable was going to be released. And all of those channels were going to need some Canadian content because the CRTC was fairly strict about that. And so the work at IMG was largely about packaging historical and vintage video content to provide those specialty channels with a case to actually launch and the ability to launch. So that was very interesting, and also learning about rights negotiations and learning about the value. My favorite job was one day when my boss asked me to figure out what the value was of the NHL in terms of commercial value. And so, that you can imagine that's kind of a dream job for a lot of people I know.
It's a dream job, but it's also a daunting question to answer. You're assigning value to not just a league, but a cultural icon, something that's big and passionate to a whole bunch of Canadians. What are companies willing to spend for just 15 or 30 seconds? But outside of your time at IMG, you also had the entrepreneurial bug. You went into business for yourself, going back to what you just said a couple minutes ago about playing store. Tell us a bit about Passage Communications.
Yeah, so Passage Communications, I love using the word launch, even though I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I started Passage Communications in my early 20s, and I was working with local businesses and helping them to make their really small media budgets work. And so whether that meant showing them what they could do locally or what they could do in print or in newspapers or in flyers, packaging, whatever it was, I was giving them consultative advice, and then also in some cases helping with logo creation and design. And I didn't realize at the time, and it was kind of ironic when you follow the career path, I didn't realize how valuable that experience would later be.
Well, we could use the term startup for it, couldn't we?
Well, you could. And, at the time, there weren't very many businesses, or nobody was catering to the local business person, and they were inundated every day with these small time sales representatives coming in asking them to advertise in church bulletins or in magazines. They didn't really have the concept of an agent or an agency working on their behalf.
You know what? I did local sales for a bit a couple of jobs ago. Actually, between my time at Rogers and Astral, I did local sales. And you go in and speak to someone, they say, I have $10,000 to spend. And then you start to go in and talk about GRPs and CPMs, and they're looking at you like, what does that mean? Can't you just put my commercial on television and things like that? So I guess you were being really more of a mentor or a consultant to them, helping them understand what their money's going, what the currencies were, the metrics and everything like that.
That's right. They needed some advocacy, and that's kind of the role that I played.
But then as that moved on, you left IMG and you moved over to Mediacom, was it?
Yeah, I moved on. It was called Media Buying Services at the time.
Oh, God, MBS. There's something I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, and I remember, telling my mentor when I was resigning from IMG, and Peter Seisen was my boss and mentor for my 4 years at IMG, and I remember distinctly him looking out the window saying, Are you sure you want to do this? Do you want to leave IMG? And I was convinced that it was the right thing to do. And, I took a massive pay cut. I think I took like a 50% pay cut. And moved back in with my parents, all on this bizarre whim of learning myself up on media.
What did you see in the role that they had presented to you at MediaCom? Because taking a 50% pay cut, moving back in with your parents, there must have been something you saw.
I don't know. I think it was learning. Email was just, email had just launched, and people were just starting to go digital. And I remember talking, at IMG about having athletes have their own profile pages and our events having web pages and things like that. But it was so early days still, and there wasn't much movement. And I figured that maybe a media company would be a faster route towards getting access to what digital was having to offer. And I was very interested in computers from the time that I was, fairly young. So I was naturally attracted to the potential of being exposed to more digital experiences there.
So what kind of things did you do there? Give us a bit of a picture or some insight into what the early stages of digital look like in the agency world.
Yeah, so that was exciting. When I first started at MBS, given the fact that I had these years at IMG, the notion of having some sort of larger barter deals with media companies and media providers was appealing to the management at MBS, and so they kind of gave me a lot of freedom to go out and explore the digital landscape, and so that led me to having meetings with people like DoubleClick that had just come into Canada.
This is way before Google had bought them.
That's right.
I don't think there even was a Google at that point.
There was no Google, and Click-Through Interactive was another one. So these were all media networks that were sort of existing, whether they were U.S.-based and just had Canadian representation or not. And I remember having conversations with people about, this amazing light bulb going off in my head, thinking, this is like financial services. This is like, a portfolio. You take an investment and you're creating almost a financial portfolio for people. You're investing a little bit here, a little bit there, and then optimizing with all these really cool tools that are, at the time that were Excel, right? But whatever, it was still groundbreaking. And so these conversations led to, the opportunity to educate people that were also at MBS that were still doing traditional advertising. Our new media group consisted of people who were exploring like elevator ads and hot air balloon ads, right? So it was like
you had hot air balloon ads?
Well, yeah,
that's incredible.
But that was the definition. Nobody really knew what new media was, and so there was, nobody, used the term new media for digital until much later.
Okay. And then after you left MediaCom, you went over to the DAC group, and tell us about your time there, because you were there for about 5 years?
Well, actually, before I went to
there was something in between.
That's right, and which was critical. So what happened was I was recruited because of all these conversations that were happening in the digital space. Recall at the time, this was like 97, so there was maybe 50 to 100 people in Toronto that were working on digital stuff at the time. And so I was recruited to work at Modem Media, Poppy Tyson, which was an off-spin of FCB at the time, Northern Interactive, or Northern Interactive, I think it was called. And so I was their media director, and I was there for about 4.5 years, and that was incredible experience. So I was working with some of the sharpest minds, I think, in the world when I looked at the global assets that we had in the UK as well as New York, Connecticut. And we did some really, really cool stuff for big clients like Coca-Cola, General Motors, and some of the key banks in Canada. And so that experience was second to none in terms of, getting exposure to startups, getting exposure to things in the digital space that needed to be tackled that weren't even invented yet. I remember one day sitting in a boardroom and somebody was like, do you think maybe people will care if we have information about them? Right? So it's like,
privacy before privacy was even an issue.
Yeah, it was kind of maybe we should talk to a lawyer. Maybe we should get into that issue a little bit more, right? So we had the opportunity and the incredible luck, as a group of people working at Modem to get exposure to some really cool first-time conversations that led to a lot of light bulbs and a lot of sleepless nights, right? So that was, no sleep, lots of caffeine.
Well, I mean, in digital, you're always taking a chance if you're doing something new. I use the term sometimes when I'm talking to planners and buyers. I'll call display traditional digital, and it almost seems like an oxymoron a bit. Like it doesn't have that fit there. But let's jump ahead from modem. Sorry, I skipped over them. The DAC group.
Yeah, so here's what was kind of interesting. At Modem, and just to give you a little bit of color on what was going on, this was the dot-com bust was about to happen.
So we're talking like 1999 or so.
We're talking about 2000,
2000,
right? So I remember I was with a friend, and if he ever listens to this, he'll laugh because he'll remember we were in New York City at a conference, and it was all about the digital space, obviously, and they did it in Broadway format. Remember, there was money like falling from the skies.
Oh, I
literally.
heard the valuations were crazy back then.
Insane, right? So every party was just, so luxurious and amazing. And at the end of this conference, this one conference we were at, they literally shot money out of a cannon.
What?
And people were on their hands and knees, and grown-ups were on their hands and knees picking up $20 bills, $5 bills. Like, it was I've never seen anything like that.
Not even $1 bills. No, they were high rollers.
Totally. And so I kind of liken that to the musicians on the Titanic, right? Because it was this really awkward, weird, luxurious scene while the ship was totally sinking. Like the big ship was sinking. And so I came back to Toronto, and things were already starting to look a little bit weird. Some of our startups just simply disappeared overnight, and businesses just started shutting down. Some of our competing agencies just shut their doors. People were getting laid off all the time. So there's websites dedicated to talking about who's been laid off today, type of thing. And I can't even say the name of the company because it's swearing. But anyways, okay. Yeah, it's just FUCK'd company was one of them, and it was just such a great website.
This podcast isn't governed by the CRTC, so you can say whatever you want.
Okay, well, Fucked Company was one of the websites that were people. It was kind of like our Facebook, right? So you'd wake up and it'd be like, okay, are we laid off yet, or is our company bust yet?
We're going to stop it right there, but come back next week for part 2 of our chat with Sonia Carreno, president of the Interactive Advertising Bureau of Canada. For more episodes, go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast and follow me on Twitter @VicGenova.